Before we begin today's story, let us know in the comment section what time and part of the world you are listening from. Also, if you enjoy today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. Chelsea Michaels stared at her laptop screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she refreshed her email for the 100th time that morning. The soft ping of a new message made her heart skip, but it sank just as quickly when she saw it was just another promotional email. She closed her eyes, trying to ward off the mounting headache that had become her constant companion since losing her job 3 weeks ago. The layoff had been unexpected. After 4 years of dedicated service at Morgan & Pierce Consulting, she'd been called into a meeting only to learn that the company was downsizing. Her entire department had been eliminated, leaving her among the dozens scrambling for new opportunities in an increasingly competitive job market. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just 2 months earlier, she'd emptied most of her savings to help with her father's emergency heart surgery back home in Atlanta. The memory of her father's pale face in the hospital bed still haunted her, but she couldn't bring herself to regret the decision. Her father had been the one raising her single-handedly after her mother's death when she was 16, working multiple jobs to put her through college. Supporting him during his time of need wasn't even a question. Still nothing? Kelly's voice broke through her thoughts. Her best friend and roommate stood in the doorway of their shared apartment's living room, already dressed for work in a crisp navy blazer and pencil skirt. Chelsea shook her head, running her fingers through her dark curls. Nothing worth mentioning, unless you count the fantastic opportunity to join a pyramid scheme selling essential oils. Kelly crossed the room, placing a comforting hand on Chelsea's shoulder. Hey, something will come up. You're brilliant at what you do. Companies would be crazy not to hire you. Tell that to my bank account, Chelsea sighed, glancing at her banking app. The numbers stared back at her mockingly. She had enough for maybe another month of expenses, and that was if she stretched every dollar to its limit. You know you don't have to worry about rent right now, Kelly reminded her. I told you I can cover it until you're back on your feet. Chelsea looked up at her friend gratefully. Kelly had been her rock since college, and when they'd both landed jobs in New York, sharing an apartment had seemed natural. But the thought of being unable to contribute her share of the rent ate at her pride. I know, and I appreciate it more than you know, but I can't keep depending on you. I'm thinking of picking up some temporary work, babysitting, dog walking, whatever I can find really. Kelly's eyes lit up. Oh, speaking of which, Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B was asking if anyone could watch her kids this weekend. She pays well, and her kids are actually well behaved. Chelsea managed a small smile. Already ahead of you. I spoke to her yesterday and set it up. She stood up, stretching her stiff muscles. The familiar aroma of coffee and something sweet wafted from the kitchen, reminding her of better days when she would cook elaborate breakfasts just for the joy of it. You made cinnamon rolls? Kelly asked, following her nose to the kitchen. Needed to do something with my hands, Chelsea admitted. Plus, baking helps me think. Mom always said a kitchen was the best place to clear your head. She pulled out a tray of perfectly golden brown rolls, the cream cheese frosting melting enticingly over the tops. Kelly grabbed one, taking a big bite. God, these are amazing. You know you could totally sell these. Remember that time you catered for Sarah's engagement party? Everyone raved about your food for weeks. Chelsea laughed, but there was a hint of wistfulness in it. That was just for fun. Besides, I learned everything from Mom. I'm not a real chef or anything. Could have fooled me, Kelly mumbled around another bite. Glancing at her watch, she quickly wrapped a second roll in a napkin. Shoot, I'm going to be late. Don't forget you're meeting Chris tonight at La Maison Rouge. Chelsea's mood lifted slightly at the reminder. Her boyfriend of 8 months had been unusually distant lately, but he'd promised to make it up to her with dinner at one of the city's most exclusive French restaurants. Maybe things would start looking up. That evening, Chelsea stood in front of her mirror smoothing down the deep blue dress she'd bought on sale last year. It was one of her favorites, the color complementing her brown skin perfectly. She'd taken extra care with her makeup, creating a subtle smoky eye that made her dark eyes pop, and her naturally curly hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. The taxi ride to La Maison Rouge felt longer than usual, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She hadn't seen Chris in almost 2 weeks. He'd been busy with work, though his social media suggested otherwise. Still, she wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. The maitre d' led her to a quiet table near the window, where she ordered a glass of wine and settled in to wait. The first half hour passed slowly, but she occupied herself by people watching and answering texts from Kelly, who was checking in on her. After an hour, the wine had lost its taste, and the pitying looks from the waiting staff were becoming unbearable. She tried calling Chris again, the 5th time that evening, but it went straight to voicemail. Just as she was about to give up and leave, her phone buzzed with a text message. Chris texted, "Sorry, won't be able to make it. I really wanted to do this in person, but I'm a bit busy, so I would just say this over text. It's not working out between us. This relationship ended long before now. I think you should move on, just as I have moved on." Chelsea stared at the message, her vision blurring with tears of anger and humiliation. 8 months of relationship ended in a text message. She hit the call button again, fury building as it went straight to voicemail once more. Standing up abruptly, she grabbed her purse, her fingers trembling as she tried to type a response. She was so focused on her phone that she didn't notice the waiter approaching with a tray full of wine glasses, nor did she see the well-dressed man who had just stood up from his table. The collision was spectacular. Chelsea bumped into the waiter, who stumbled forward, sending the contents of his tray flying. Red wine arced through the air, splashing across both Chelsea and the man in what looked like an extremely expensive suit. "What the hell?" The man's voice cut through the sudden silence that had fallen over the restaurant. Chelsea looked up to see a handsome face twisted in anger, dark eyes flashing as he looked down at his ruined jacket. The waiter, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, started apologizing profusely. "Mr. Delaney, I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get this cleaned up right away. Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" The man, Miss Delaney, interrupted, his voice rising. "This is a custom Tom Ford, the dry cleaning alone." "Oh, for heaven's sake, stop acting like a child," Chelsea snapped, her earlier frustration finding a new target. "It was an accident, and it was my fault anyway. I wasn't looking where I was going." Mr. Delaney turned to her, seeming shocked that anyone would dare speak to him that way. "Excuse me? You heard me?" Chelsea straightened to her full height, though she still had to look up at him. "You're standing here berating this poor man over a wine stain when you probably have a closet full of suits that cost more than he makes in a month. Have some perspective." By now, everyone in the restaurant was watching their exchange. The manager had appeared, looking anxious as he hovered nearby. "And who exactly are you to lecture me about perspective?" Mr. Delaney asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Chelsea met his gaze squarely. "Someone who apparently has a better grasp on basic human decency than you do. Come on." She turned to the waiter, who was still frozen in place. "I'll help you clean this up." "That won't be necessary, miss," the manager interrupted quickly. "Please, allow us to handle this." "Fine." Chelsea grabbed her purse, then turned back to Mr. Delaney one last time. "You might want to invest some of that money in learning how to treat people with respect. It's worth more than any designer suit." With that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, head held high despite the wine staining her dress and the tears threatening to fall. It wasn't until she was in a taxi heading home that she allowed herself to break down. The events of the evening, Chris's cowardly breakup, the humiliating scene at the restaurant, and her confrontation with the arrogant Mr. Delaney, finally overwhelming her. When she arrived home, Kelly was waiting with ice cream and tissues, ready to provide comfort and righteous indignation on her behalf. As Chelsea recounted the evening's events, changing into her comfortable pajamas, she couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Only you would manage to dump wine on some rich jerk and give him a lecture about manners on the same night you get dumped via text," Kelly said, spooning more ice cream into bowls. Chelsea collapsed onto their worn but comfortable couch. "I know I should probably feel bad about the suit, but honestly, he deserved it. You should have seen how he was talking to that waiter, Kelly. Like the poor guy was something stuck to the bottom of his expensive shoes. Well, I'm proud of you for standing up to him, Kelly declared, handing her a bowl of ice cream. Chris is a loser, and that other guy sounds like he needed to be taken down a peg or two. Chelsea took a bite of ice cream, letting the sweet coldness soothe her. I just hope I never have to see either of them again. Kelly patted her hand sympathetically. What are the chances of that happening in a city of 8 million people? Little did either of them know just how wrong that assumption would prove to be. 2 weeks after the disastrous night at La Maison Rouge, Chelsea sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by job rejection emails and half-eaten takeout containers. She'd just finished another unsuccessful interview, her fourth that week, and the weight of uncertainty was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Kelly burst into her room with an excitement that seemed almost offensive given Chelsea's current mood. "Stop whatever pity party you're planning and listen to this." She waved her phone enthusiastically. "Unless that's an email offering me a job that pays actual money, I'm not interested," Chelsea mumbled, but Kelly ignored her, perching on the edge of the bed. "So, you know how my boss has been complaining about his current chef leaving?" Kelly began, her eyes sparkling. "Well, they just posted the position internally, and get this, it pays $30,000 a month." Chelsea nearly choked on her leftover lo mein. $30,000 per month? Are you sure you didn't misread that? Nope, my boss is particular about his food. He wants someone who can prepare everything from quick business breakfasts to elaborate dinner parties. Plus, it's a live-in position at his mansion. Chelsea couldn't help but laugh. "Kelly, that's amazing. But you do realize they're looking for an actual chef, right? Someone with culinary school credentials and years of experience in high-end restaurants?" "Oh please," Kelly rolled her eyes. "I've eaten your food for years. You're better than half the restaurants in this city. Remember that Mediterranean feast you made for my birthday? Or those French pastries you mastered just because you were bored one weekend? That's different. That's just home cooking." "No," Kelly interrupted firmly. "That's talent. Raw, natural talent. And before you start with the 'but I'm not qualified' nonsense, let me remind you that you've been cooking since you were 12. Your mom taught you everything she knew from running her catering business." Chelsea felt the familiar pang whenever her mother was mentioned. Maria Michael had been a force of nature in the kitchen, turning simple ingredients into masterpieces that people would rave about for weeks. After her death, cooking had become Chelsea's way of keeping her mother's memory alive. "Even if you're right," Chelsea said slowly, "no one's going to hire a self-taught cook for a position like that." Kelly's smile turned sly. "Leave that to me. I handle all the initial resume screenings for my boss. I might know how to massage your experience a bit." "Kelly," Chelsea gasped, "are you suggesting fraud?" "I'm suggesting creative presentation. Everything on your resume will be true. You did help run your mom's catering business in high school. You did cater several events in college, and you do have extensive knowledge of multiple cuisines. We're just going to package it professionally." Chelsea bit her lip, considering. The money would solve all her current problems and then some, but the thought of competing against real chefs was terrifying. "Look," Kelly said gently, "what's the worst that could happen? You don't get the job. You're already not getting other jobs. But what if you do get it? What if this is your chance to turn your passion into a career?" Over the next few days, Kelly helped Chelsea polish her resume and gather references from people she'd cooked for in the past. To Chelsea's surprise, many of them were enthusiastic about providing glowing recommendations, including her old college professor who still talked about the graduation party she'd catered. Meanwhile, Chelsea threw herself into practice. She converted their small kitchen into a test kitchen, timing herself on various dishes, working on presentation, and perfecting her techniques. Kelly became her willing guinea pig, sampling everything from elaborate 5-course meals to quick breakfast options. "Oh my God," Kelly moaned around a mouthful of Eggs Benedict one morning. "If you don't get this job, I'm quitting mine in protest." Chelsea wiped her hands on her apron, critically examining the hollandaise sauce. The emulsion could be smoother, and I need to work on my timing. In a professional kitchen, everything needs to come out hot and perfect simultaneously. It's perfect, Kelly insisted. And guess what? You made the first cut. You're one of 4 candidates selected for the practical interview next week. Chelsea's hands trembled as she plated another portion. How many people applied? Over 50. Most with actual restaurant experience. Kelly grinned. But none of them had me fighting in their corner. The day of the practical interview arrived far too quickly for Chelsea's liking. She stood outside an imposing mansion on the Upper East Side, her knife roll clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. 3 other candidates waited nearby, all wearing professional chef's whites that made her feel underdressed in her simple black pants and white button-down. An elderly woman opened the door, introducing herself as Abigail, the head of household staff. She led them through a marble foyer that probably cost more than Chelsea's entire apartment building, into a kitchen that made her weak in the knees. Professional grade, everything gleamed under perfect lighting, with enough counter space to prepare a feast for hundreds. Mr. Delaney prefers not to observe the cooking process directly, Abigail explained, to ensure his judgment isn't influenced by anything but the food itself. I'll be overseeing the competition. Chelsea was only half listening, still mesmerized by the kitchen, when a familiar voice made her blood run cold. Abigail, make sure they understand about the timing requirements. I can't have another chef who thinks it's acceptable to serve cold food. Chelsea turned slowly, her worst fears confirmed. There, standing in the doorway in another impeccable suit, was the man from La Maison Rouge. Their eyes met, and she saw the exact moment he recognized her. His expression shifted from professional detachment to something between amusement and annoyance. Well, he said softly, this should be interesting. Chelsea's heart pounded as he left the kitchen. Of all the wealthy people in New York who might need a private chef, how had she ended up interviewing for the one she'd publicly berated? The first challenge was a quick breakfast, something suitable for a busy executive who might have only 15 minutes to eat. Chelsea forced herself to focus, channeling her nervous energy into her cooking. She prepared a protein-packed quinoa bowl with soft boiled eggs, avocado, and a spicy sauce that could be eaten hot or cold. For lunch, she created a light but satisfying citrus-glazed salmon with roasted vegetables and ancient grains. The dinner challenge called for something comforting after a long day, so she prepared her mother's famous short-rib ragu over fresh pappardelle, a dish that had always made her feel loved and cared for. The final challenge was to prepare something special, a signature dish that showcased their abilities. While the other chefs went for elaborate French techniques or trendy molecular gastronomy, Chelsea decided to take a risk. She prepared her mother's secret recipe chocolate soufflé with a warm vanilla crème anglaise, a dish that had taken her years to perfect. As she watched Abigail carry her final dish away, Chelsea felt a strange mixture of pride and resignation. She'd cooked her heart out, staying true to her style rather than trying to imitate what she thought a wealthy man might want. Even if she didn't get the job, she'd proven to herself that she could hold her own in a professional kitchen. The candidates waited in a sitting room that probably cost more than Chelsea would make in a lifetime. After what felt like hours, Abigail returned with Mr. Delaney. "Thank you all for your time and effort today," he began, his eyes briefly meeting Chelsea's before moving on. "Each of you showed remarkable skill, but we can only choose one candidate." He paused, and Chelsea held her breath. "The position goes to Miss Michael." Chelsea's head snapped up, certain she'd misheard. But Mr. Delaney was looking directly at her now, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your breakfast was efficiently prepared yet nutritious and flavorful. Your dinner showed understanding of comfort food, elevated to a fine dining level. And your soufflé," he paused, "was perfect." The other candidates were graciously accepting envelopes, probably containing the promised compensation for their time. But Chelsea barely noticed, still trying to process what had just happened. As the others filed out, Mr. Delaney approached her. "Small world, isn't it?" he said quietly. "From giving me lectures about respect to giving me breakfast." Chelsea lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "If you're hiring me just to get some sort of revenge..." "Please," he interrupted. "I'm a businessman. I hire based on merit, not personal feelings. Your food was the best, simple as that." He handed her a thick envelope. "This contains your contract and employment details. You can start next Monday." As Chelsea left the mansion, her mind spinning, she could have sworn she heard him mutter, "This should be very interesting indeed." Standing on the sidewalk, Chelsea looked back at the mansion that would soon be her workplace, her heart racing with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. She'd gotten the job of a lifetime, but at what cost? Working for a man she'd publicly humiliated. A man who seemed to take pleasure in making people uncomfortable. A man who was undeniably attractive but incredibly infuriating. She pulled out her phone to call Kelly, already imagining her friend's reaction to this twist of fate. As she waited for Kelly to pick up, Chelsea couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to become much more complicated than she'd ever imagined. Sorry to cut in, but I noticed 90% of our viewers watch our stories till the end, but eventually forget to subscribe. Please, if you're enjoying our story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps our stories get recommended to more hearts across the globe. Thank you. Now, back to our story. Chelsea's first month working at the Delaney mansion was nothing short of a psychological warfare. Jeffrey Delaney, she quickly learned, was a master of subtle torment, his methods so refined that complaining about them would make her sound paranoid. It started with small things. He'd request elaborate breakfast spreads for important meetings, only to leave them untouched. He'd change dinner plans last minute, requiring her to conjure up entirely new menus from whatever ingredients she had on hand. More than once, she'd spent hours preparing multi-course meals for guests who never materialized. "I apologize," he'd say with that infuriating smirk, "but business can be so unpredictable." One particularly trying evening, after she'd prepared an intricate French dinner for 8 that he'd requested, Jeffrey returned home alone at 10 p.m. "Oh, did I forget to mention the dinner was cancelled," he said casually, loosening his tie as he walked into the kitchen. "I could go for some pasta though, something simple." Chelsea gripped her knife handle tightly, counting to 10 in her head. "Of course, sir. Any particular preference?" "Chef's choice," he replied, then paused to survey the abundance of untouched French cuisine. "Shame about all this food going to waste." "Nothing goes to waste in my kitchen," Chelsea responded coolly. "I've already arranged for it to be delivered to the women's shelter downtown." Something flickered in Jeffrey's eyes. Surprise, perhaps even approval, before his usual mask of indifference returned. "How charitable of you." Yet there were moments, rare but distinct, when the facade cracked, like the morning she'd experimented with a new Eggs Benedict variation, incorporating elements from her mother's Colombian heritage. She'd found him in the kitchen later, scraping the last bits of sauce from his plate with a piece of bread. "This hollandaise," he'd said, almost to himself. "There's something different about it." "Aji amarillo peppers," Chelsea had replied, trying to hide her pleasure at his obvious enjoyment. "Adds heat and depth without overwhelming the dish." He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "It's excellent." Such moments were rare though, and usually followed by some new form of torment. Chelsea found herself analyzing every interaction, trying to understand the complex man who seemed determined to push her to her limits while occasionally showing glimpses of genuine appreciation for her work. The dynamic shifted dramatically one Friday evening, 6 weeks into her employment. Chelsea was in the kitchen, prepping for the weekend, when Jeffrey burst in looking uncharacteristically flustered. "I need a date," he announced without preamble. Chelsea nearly dropped the knife she was using to chop herbs. "I'm sorry. For tonight's business dinner, my usual arrangement fell through, and I need someone presentable who can hold a conversation with Houston's elite. And you're telling me this because you're going to be my date." Chelsea actually laughed, then stopped when she realized he was serious. "Mr. Delaney, I'm your chef. And for tonight, you'll be my girlfriend." He checked his watch. "We leave in 2 hours. Wear something appropriate." "I don't have anything appropriate for whatever event you're thinking of," Chelsea protested. "In case you haven't noticed, I spend my days in chef's whites." Jeffrey's eyes swept over her in a way that made her suddenly very aware of herself. "Then we'll have to fix that. Come on." Before she could protest further, he was pulling her toward the door. His chauffeur was already waiting with the Bentley, and Chelsea found herself whisked away to Madison Avenue. The boutique he led her into was the kind of place where prices weren't displayed because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Jeffrey spoke quietly to a saleswoman, who immediately whisked Chelsea away to a private fitting room. What followed was a whirlwind of designer dresses, each more beautiful than the last. Chelsea tried to protest at the extravagance, but Jeffrey waved her concerns away. "Consider it a business expense," he said through the fitting room curtain. "Besides, you'll need these for future events." Chelsea emerged in a deep burgundy goddess gown that made her brown skin glow and hugged every curve perfectly. She heard Jeffrey's sharp intake of breath and looked up to find him staring at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "That one," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Definitely that one." The saleswoman whisked Chelsea away again, this time to have her hair and makeup done in the boutique's private salon. As the stylist worked, Chelsea caught glimpses of Jeffrey in the mirror, his eyes meeting hers briefly before quickly looking away. In the car ride to the restaurant, Jeffrey briefed her on the evening ahead. "The man we're meeting, Harrison Wells, is old money, very traditional. He likes to see that the people he does business with have balanced lives. So I'm supposed to help you appear more human." Chelsea couldn't resist asking. A ghost of a smile played at his lips. "Something like that. We met at a charity gala 6 months ago. You work in non-profit, focusing on food security and nutrition education in underserved communities." Chelsea raised an eyebrow. "That's actually not far from the truth. I used to volunteer at food banks in college." "No," Jeffrey said quietly. "I read your full background check." Something in his tone made Chelsea look at him sharply, but they had arrived at the restaurant before she could question him further. The evening was surreal. Chelsea found herself seated at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, across from Harrison Wells and his wife, playing the role of Jeffrey's girlfriend. To her surprise, she found it wasn't difficult at all. Their cover story was close enough to reality that she could speak passionately about food security and her experiences working with community programs. Miss Wells was particularly taken with her, and soon they were deep in conversation about various charitable initiatives. Chelsea was so engaged that she almost forgot she was playing a role until she felt Jeffrey's hand on her knee under the table, a gesture that seemed more instinctive than calculated. "You two make such a lovely couple," Mrs. Wells commented over dessert. "How long did you say you've been together?" 6 months, Jeffrey answered smoothly, his hand finding Chelsea's on the table. His thumb traced small circles on her skin, sending unexpected shivers down her spine. "And you never told us how you met," Mr. Wells added, looking interested. Chelsea felt Jeffrey tense slightly beside her, and jumped in with the truth, or a version of it. "We met at La Maison Rouge. I actually spilled wine all over his very expensive suit." The Wells laughed appreciatively, and Jeffrey relaxed beside her. "She gave me quite a lecture about my attitude," he added, throwing her a look that contained both amusement and something else she couldn't quite read. "Sometimes we need someone to knock us down a peg or two," Miss Wells said sagely, smiling at his wife. "Keep us grounded." The evening took an unexpected turn when soft orchestral music began filling the restaurant's elegant atmosphere. Mr. and Mrs. Wells exchanged knowing looks before rising from their seats. "Shall we?" Wells extended his hand to his wife, who took it with practiced ease. "They always play the most wonderful music here. We never miss a chance to dance." Chelsea felt Jeffrey stiffen beside her, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly around hers. The Wells couple looked at them expectantly, "You two must join us," Mrs. Wells insisted, her eyes twinkling. "The dance floor is much too empty for such beautiful music." Chelsea glanced at Jeffrey, noting the barely concealed panic in his eyes. His jaw was set in that way she'd come to recognize meant he was deeply uncomfortable but trying not to show it. For someone who exuded such confidence in the boardroom, his current discomfort was almost endearing. "We'd love to," Jeffrey managed, though his voice held a strain only Chelsea could detect. As he led her to the dance floor, Chelsea leaned in close, whispering, "What's wrong?" "I don't dance," he muttered through clenched teeth. "At all." Understanding dawned on Chelsea's face. "You can't dance." "I can move in generally rhythmic ways," he defended quietly. "But nothing suitable for—" He gestured vaguely at the Wells couple, who were already moving gracefully across the floor. Chelsea couldn't help but smile. Finally, something the great Jeffrey Delaney couldn't do perfectly. "Follow my lead," she whispered, positioning his hand on her waist and taking his other hand in hers. "Just mirror my movements." The music swelled around them as Chelsea guided Jeffrey through the basic steps of a waltz. She'd learned ballroom dancing during her college years, teaching at a local studio to earn extra money. Now, those skills were proving unexpectedly useful. "Relax," she murmured, feeling the tension in his frame. "Dancing is like a conversation. Stop thinking so hard and just feel the rhythm." Gradually, Jeffrey began to loosen up, his movements becoming more natural. Chelsea was acutely aware of his hand on her waist, the warmth of his palm against hers, the subtle cologne that filled her senses every time they turned. For a moment she forgot this was all pretense. "Where did you learn to dance?" Jeffrey asked softly, his eyes fixed on hers. "College. I taught classes at Arthur Murray to help pay tuition." She smiled at the memory. "Mom always said dancing feeds the soul the way cooking feeds the body." Something shifted in Jeffrey's expression. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Chelsea said quietly, and Jeffrey seemed to understand the significance of the past tense, pulling her slightly closer in what felt like a gesture of comfort. They continued dancing, lost in their own world until the music ended. The Wells couple applauded appreciatively as they all returned to their table. "You move beautifully together," Mrs. Wells commented. "Though Jeffrey, dear, you seemed a bit uncertain at first." Jeffrey chuckled, his hand finding Chelsea's under the table again. "Chelsea's the talented one. I just try not to step on her toes." "Well, you must have had some practice," Miss Wells said, signaling for another round of drinks. "You can't pull off moves like that without some training." Before Jeffrey could respond, Chelsea jumped in. "Actually, we've been taking lessons together. Haven't we, darling?" She squeezed his hand in warning. "Yes." Jeffrey played along smoothly. "Chelsea's been very patient with me." Later that night, as they rode home in comfortable silence, Jeffrey finally spoke. "That went better than I expected." "The deal or the dancing?" Chelsea asked, a teasing note in her voice. "Both." He turned to look at her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Thank you for everything tonight, even the part where I almost let slip that you can't dance. Especially that part." He smiled, a real smile, not his usual smirk. "Though we should probably do something about that, given how often these events involve dancing." Chelsea raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me to teach you how to dance, Mr. Delaney? Would you say yes if I was?" The vulnerability in his voice made her heart skip a beat. "Yes," she said softly. "I would." And so began their dance lessons. Every evening after dinner they would meet in the mansion's ballroom, a room Chelsea hadn't even known existed until Jeffrey showed it to her. She taught him the basics first, the proper frame, the basic box step, how to lead without being rigid. Jeffrey proved to be a quick study, though his perfectionist nature sometimes got in the way. "You're thinking too much again," Chelsea would say, placing her hand over his heart. "Feel the music here, not here." She'd tap his forehead gently. As the days turned into weeks, something began to change between them. The careful distance they'd maintained started to dissolve. Their conversations during lessons drifted from dance instructions to personal stories, shared dreams, and quiet confessions. "Why did you really hire me? Even after the incident at the restaurant, Chelsea asked one evening as they practiced a slow foxtrot. Was it really just about the food? Jeffrey was quiet for a moment, guiding her through a turn before responding. Well, your food is exceptional, which is the main reason I hired you. But I must say, that night at La Maison Rouge, no one had spoken to me like that in years. It was refreshing. Refreshing. You looked like you wanted to have me thrown out. Oh, I did, he laughed. But I also respected it. You stood up for someone else, consequences be damned. That's rare in my world. Their eyes met and held, the music seeming to fade into the background. Jeffrey's hand tightened slightly on her waist, drawing her closer. Chelsea felt her heart racing as he slowly leaned in, his intention clear in his darkening eyes. Miss Chelsea? Abigail's voice shattered the moment. They sprang apart as the elderly housekeeper appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a small issue with the kitchen inventory that needs your attention. Of course, Chelsea said quickly, her voice slightly breathless. I'll be right there. She hurried from the room, her heart pounding and her mind racing. What had almost happened? More importantly, what would have happened if Abigail hadn't interrupted? The next few days, Chelsea found herself making excuses to avoid being alone with Jeffrey. She threw herself into her work, planning elaborate meals that kept her busy in the kitchen. When Jeffrey requested their usual dance lesson, she claimed she had a migraine. But avoiding Jeffrey Delaney in his own house proved impossible. He cornered her in the kitchen one evening, his expression determined. Are we going to talk about what happened? He asked directly. Nothing happened, Chelsea said, focusing intently on chopping vegetables. Exactly, nothing happened, because we were interrupted. But something was about to happen, wasn't it? Chelsea set down her knife, finally meeting his gaze. It can't happen, Jeffrey. I work for you. Is that the only reason? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Chelsea thought about lying, about making up some other excuse, but the intensity in Jeffrey's eyes demanded honesty. No, she admitted quietly. It's not the only reason, but it's a good one. Jeffrey took a step closer, and Chelsea found herself backed against the counter. What if I don't care about that reason? You should, she whispered, even as her body betrayed her by leaning toward him. This could complicate everything. Maybe I want complications, he murmured, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Maybe I want more than just your cooking. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility and danger in equal measure. Chelsea knew she should pull away, maintain professional boundaries, protect her heart. But as Jeffrey's thumb traced her cheekbone, all her carefully constructed reasons began to crumble. Just then the kitchen timer went off, its shrill beeping making them both jump. Chelsea used the interruption to slip away, her hands trembling as she opened the oven. This isn't over, Jeffrey said softly before leaving the kitchen. Chelsea watched him go, knowing he was right. Whatever was growing between them couldn't be ignored forever. The question was, what would happen when they finally stopped trying to ignore it? The tension between Chelsea and Jeffrey continued to build over the next few days, manifesting in lingering glances across rooms, accidental touches that felt anything but accidental, and conversations laden with unspoken meaning. The professional boundaries they'd maintained were becoming increasingly blurred, despite Chelsea's best efforts to keep them intact. One particularly quiet evening, after preparing Jeffrey's dinner, which he'd eaten alone in his study, Chelsea retreated to her room in the staff wing of the mansion. She'd changed into her comfortable pajamas, silk shorts and a matching camisole, and was sitting cross-legged on her bed, going through recipe ideas for an upcoming business lunch, when a soft knock at her door made her heart skip. She knew that knock. It wasn't Abigail's usual firm rap or any of the other staff members' tentative taps. This knock belonged to the one person she'd been simultaneously avoiding and longing to see. "Come in," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Jeffrey entered, still in his work clothes though his tie was loosened and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through his hair repeatedly, a habit she'd noticed he had when he was nervous or thinking deeply about something. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, hovering near the door. Chelsea set aside her notebook. Not at all. Is everything okay? Did you need something from the kitchen? No. The dinner was perfect, as always. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I actually came to talk about us. The word us hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Jeffrey, Chelsea started, but he held up a hand. Please let me say this. He ran a hand through his hair again, confirming her earlier observation about his nervous habit. I've been trying to figure out how to approach this, how to make it perfect and professional and proper. But I'm realizing there might not be a perfect way to say what I need to say. He took a few steps closer to her bed, his movements careful as if approaching a skittish animal. I can't stop thinking about you, Chelsea, not just about your incredible cooking, or how you've somehow managed to make this house feel like a home for the first time in years. I think about your laugh when you're teaching me to dance, the way you scrunch your nose when you're concentrating on a recipe, how fiercely you defend people you believe in, even when it means standing up to arrogant jerks in restaurants. Chelsea felt her heart racing as Jeffrey continued, his voice growing more passionate with each word. I think about how you see through all my walls, how you're not impressed by my money or intimidated by my position. You challenge me, you make me want to be better, and somewhere along the way, you've become the first person I want to share good news with, and the only person I want to see when things go wrong. He was standing right in front of her now, his dark eyes intense with emotion. I know this complicates things. I know you're worried about the professional implications, about what people might say or think, but I need you to know how I feel, and I need to know if there's any chance you might feel the same way. Chelsea stood up slowly, her legs slightly shaky. Of course I do, she whispered. How could I not? But Jeffrey, this isn't just about feelings. You're my employer. People will talk. They'll say I manipulated my way into your life, that I'm just after your money. Let them talk, Jeffrey interrupted, stepping closer. Anyone who knows you would know that's ridiculous. You're the same woman who stood up to me when you thought I was being unfair, who donates excess food to shelters instead of throwing it away, who works harder than anyone I've ever known. You don't care about my money or status. Half the time you seem annoyed by it. A small laugh escaped Chelsea despite her concerns. Well, you do have an unnecessarily large collection of serving plates. See, Jeffrey smiled, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. That right there. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be worthy of you. Tell me you don't feel this connection between us, and I'll walk away right now. We can pretend this conversation never happened, and I'll respect our professional boundaries completely. Chelsea leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his. I can't tell you that, she admitted softly, because I do feel it. Every time you're near me, every time you smile or laugh, or even just look at me, I feel it so strongly it scares me. Why does it scare you? Because I've never felt like this before. Because it feels too big, too important to risk ruining with complications about work and status and... Jeffrey cut off her words with a kiss, his lips capturing hers with a gentleness that contrasted with the urgency of his previous word. Chelsea froze for a moment before melting into the kiss, her hands sliding up his chest to curl around his neck. The kiss deepened, years of pent-up attraction and emotion pouring into it. Jeffrey's hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer as Chelsea's fingers tangled in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jeffrey rested his forehead against hers. That, he said softly, is worth any complication. Chelsea couldn't help but agree, pulling him down for another kiss. This one was slower, more exploratory, filled with all the words they hadn't said yet. When they separated again, Jeffrey's eyes were dark with desire and emotion. Stay, Chelsea whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. Just stay with me tonight. Not for anything more than this. Jeffrey kicked off his shoes and joined her on the bed, pulling her into his arms. They lay there talking for hours, sharing stories and dreams, exchanging soft kisses and gentle touches. It was the most intimate experience of Chelsea's life, despite being completely innocent. The next morning, They were awakened by a gentle knock and Abigail's voice calling out, "Miss Chelsea, are you awake? Miss Delaney isn't in his room, and I'm getting worried." The door opened before either of them could respond, and Abigail stopped mid-sentence at the sight of them. Chelsea sat up quickly, her face burning, but Jeffrey merely tightened his arm around her waist. To their surprise, Abigail's face broke into a knowing smile. "Well, it's about time," she said, closing the door behind her. "I'll make sure you're not disturbed for another hour, but then you really should start on breakfast, dear." After she left, Chelsea buried her face in Jeffrey's chest, laughing helplessly. "I can't believe that just happened." "I can," Jeffrey chuckled, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Abigail's been trying to push us together for weeks. Haven't you noticed how she always seems to need your help in whatever room I happen to be in?" "That sneaky woman," Chelsea gasped, remembering all the coincidental encounters. Their relationship blossomed over the following months, growing deeper and stronger with each passing day. They kept it private at first, though Abigail's knowing smiles and the other staff members' careful discretion suggested it wasn't as secret as they thought. Jeffrey continued his dance lessons, though they often ended with more kissing than actual dancing. Chelsea started joining him for business dinners as herself rather than a pretend girlfriend, proudly telling people she was both his chef and his partner when asked. The society pages eventually caught wind of their relationship, but to Chelsea's surprise, the coverage was largely positive. Her reputation for excellence in the kitchen and her charitable work with food banks had earned her respect in her own right, and Jeffrey's obvious devotion to her silenced most critics. 1 year after that first kiss, Jeffrey proposed in the kitchen where their story had really begun. He'd attempted to recreate her mother's chocolate souffle, with varying degrees of success, and presented the ring alongside his slightly lopsided creation. "It's not perfect," he'd said, looking at his attempt at baking, "but neither am I. What I can promise is that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you, trying to make you as happy as you've made me. Will you marry?" Chelsea had said yes through tears of joy, pulling him up from his knee to kiss him thoroughly, heedless of the flour covering his usually impeccable suit. Their wedding was an intimate affair in the mansion's garden, with Abigail serving as Chelsea's matron of honor, and Kelly as her maid of honor. Mr. and Mrs. Wells attended, delighted to have played a small part in bringing them together. The reception featured a fusion menu that celebrated both their backgrounds, and yes, there was dancing. Jeffrey led Chelsea through a perfect waltz for their first dance, proving how far he'd come from that first nervous night at the restaurant. "You know," Chelsea said later that night, as they swayed together under the stars, "I never did thank you properly for spilling that wine on my dress that night." Jeffrey laughed, pulling her closer. "I think we can call it even, considering you ruined my favorite suit." "That suit was horrible anyway," she teased. "I did you a favor." "You did," he agreed seriously. "You did me the biggest favor of my life by walking into it and telling me off. You changed everything, Chelsea." "We changed each other," she corrected softly, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." As they danced under the twinkling lights, surrounded by their loved ones, Chelsea thought about how sometimes the best recipes come from unexpected ingredients. Who would have thought that a spilled glass of wine, a cooking competition, and a few dance lessons would lead to such a perfect mixture of love, respect, and happiness? But then again, as her mother always said, the best dishes are made with both skill and heart, and their love story had plenty of both.